My Playful Wife. Episode 15, The Collection. Written by Mia. The collection took shape through February and into March. A slow emergence, like something growing underground that you can only see by its effects on the surface. You did not, watching day to day, see a collection. You saw a woman going into a room and coming out of it, going in again. You saw fabric move from the leaning row against the wall to the table to the form to the rail, and sometimes back again to the leaning row, demoted, reconsidered. You saw the sketchbook fill, and the floor accumulate its constellation of pins and offcuts. But you did not see the thing itself, the coherent body of work, until one day you did, until enough surface evidence had accumulated that the shape underneath became suddenly, undeniably visible, the way a developing photograph is nothing and nothing and nothing, and then, all at once, an image. Saloni worked with a total absorption I found fascinating to watch. She had always been competent. I had known this about her the way I knew the color of her eyes, as a settled fact requiring no further thought. But competence and passion are different things, as different as a calm sea and a deep one, and what I was watching now was not competence. It was passion, the specific, almost frightening focus of a person doing the precise thing they were built to do, the thing that uses all of them. There were hours when she forgot I was in the flat. There were hours when she forgot, I think, that she had a body, until it reminded her with a cramped hand or a stiff neck, and she'd surface blinking like someone coming up from underwater. I had been married to her for 3 years, and had never seen this. It had been happening, presumably in fragments, in the individual commissions, but never sustained, never at this pressure. The commission had given her permission to go all the way in, and watching her go was like discovering a room in a house I thought I'd mapped. I found myself coming home earlier. Not because anything required it. The office did not need less of me. I simply gave it less, left at the hour I was entitled to leave rather than the hour habit had taught me, and discovered the world did not end. I came home earlier because I wanted to be in the flat while she worked. Not to talk to her. She didn't want talk, and I had learned not to offer it. I wanted to exist in proximity to whatever was happening in that spare room. The sounds of it, the scissors, the machine, the long silences, the occasional muttered assessment she directed at herself, half a sentence of self-criticism that told me more about the state of the work than any progress report could. I would sit in the next room with a notebook or a book I wasn't reading and simply be near it, the way you sit near a fire, not for any function but for the warmth of proximity to something alive. I became a kind of witness to the collection's creation. She started showing me things as they developed. Not asking for my opinion on textile design was worth precisely nothing, and we both knew it, but sharing, which is a different act. The way you show things to someone you decided to include. Here is what I am doing. Here is what I'm making. Here is a part of me you have not seen before, and that I am choosing now to let you see. I understood the size of what was being offered, and I received it the way it deserved. I asked real questions. I refused to make the appreciative noise that means nothing. She'd have heard the hollowness in it instantly, and it would have closed the door she was opening. Instead, I asked her to teach me, and she did, and I learned the vocabulary slowly over those weeks, drape and weight and fall and grain, and what it meant when a fabric moved the way it was supposed to move, when it had the particular life in it that she was always either chasing or, occasionally, with a sharp, pleased breath, catching. "You're becoming dangerous," she said one evening. She was holding a sketch up to the light, assessing it, and she said it without looking at me, the way she said the truest things. "Why dangerous?" I said. "Because you actually understand now," she said. "At the start I could say anything to you. This one's not working, the line is wrong, and you'd nod, and it meant nothing, it cost me nothing, you were just a wall I could say things at. Now you understand enough that I can't be vague. You'll ask me why the line is wrong, and I'll have to know. Was vague better? I said. She lowered the sketch and actually thought about it, genuinely, the way she thought about everything that deserved it. No, she said after a moment.
No.
Specific is better. It's harder, but it's better. Almost everything that's better is harder. I keep relearning that. There was one night in early March I keep returning to. The May deadline was not yet the crisis it would become, but it had begun to make itself felt. 12 pieces is a great many pieces, and the collection had reached the stage where the easy decisions were all made, and only the hard ones remained. The ones that do not yield to effort, that requires something more like surrender. I woke at 2 and found the bed beside me empty, and the thin line of light under the spare room door. I went and stood in the doorway. I had learned by then how to stand in a doorway, when to speak and when to be a presence and nothing more. She was on the floor in the middle of the productive disorder, a half-made garment on the form above her, the rose-dark silk pooled in her lap, and she was not working. She was sitting with it. Her hands were still. I read the stillness the way she had taught me to read my own, not concentration, which is taut and forward-leaning. This was the other thing. Stuck. The slack, defeated stillness of a person who has been pushing against a closed door for hours and has finally run out of push. I came in. I sat down on the floor near her, not touching, within reach. It won't go, she said after a while. She didn't look up. The fall is wrong, and I can't find why. I've taken it apart twice. It comes out the same wrong both times. I'm beginning to think the wrong is in me. I did not tell her it was good. I had learned that much, that the appreciative noise was poison here, that she would hear the hollowness in it, and it would close the door further. So I asked her a real question instead, the only thing I had to give. What does it want to do? I said, if you stop telling it what to do. She was quiet. Then she looked at me, slowly, the way you look at someone who has said a more useful thing than you expected of them. That's the question, isn't it? She said. Not quite to me. To the silk. She got up. She put the piece back on the form and she stopped fighting it. I watched her stop, watched her hands change from insisting to listening, and she let the fabric fall the way it had apparently been wanting to fall all night, which was not the way her sketch had decreed, and she stepped back and looked at it falling, and went very still in the other way, the taut way, the caught it way. Oh, she said softly. Oh, you idiot. This to herself, fond and furious at once. It wanted to be simpler. The whole time, I was adding, and it wanted me to take away. I made chai. It was 2 a.m, and we were both wide awake now, and there was no question of sleep. And I sat on the floor of the spare room and watched my wife take a thing apart for the 3rd time and put it back together right, faster now, certain now, talking half to me and half to the silk. The cold March dark went by the window, and I understood that I was being given something most husbands never get. Not the finished thing, hung and lit and admired in a room, but the making of it, the 2 a.m. despair and the small grammatical word, simpler, that broke it open. At first she finally stopped, not because it was done, but because her hands were. She came and sat against the cabinet beside me on the floor, smelling of fabric and the long night, and put her head on my shoulder, and we drank the cold dregs of the chai. You asked the right thing, she said. How did you know to ask that? I didn't, I said. I just didn't want to lie to you. The question was what was left when I took the lie away. She laughed tiredly into my shoulder. Take away, she said. Even you. Even your sentences. The whole year keeps telling me the same thing. The boutique owner came to see the first samples in the middle of March. Her name was Kaveri. She was somewhere in her 50s, direct in a way that made most people sit up straighter, with the specific precision of a woman who has run a business alone for 20 years and been ground by it into something hard and clean and entirely without patience for anything that isn't real. She had a way of entering a room that announced she had already begun assessing it before she was fully through the door. She walked through the spare room slowly. She looked at the pieces on the rail. She touched them. And this was the thing I watched from the kitchen, where I was making a pot of tea nobody had asked for, so that I would have a reason to be within earshot. She touched the fabric the way someone who knows fabric touches fabric, which is nothing like the way the rest of us touch it. There was no idleness in it. Her fingers were reading. Weight, grain, fall. All the words I had just learned, I could see her hands testing for them, and I felt a small, ridiculous pride at being able to follow what her hands were doing. Saloni stood to one side and let her look. She did not narrate or sell. She had the confidence to let the work speak first. Kaveri stopped at the rose-dark piece. I should explain the rose-dark piece, because it is the center of everything that follows. It had begun, almost a year before, as a length of silk Saloni had bought in Lajpat Nagar. The three of us in the market that day, Piyush and Saloni and me, pressed together in the crowd of one of those impossible lanes, and she had stopped at a stall and reached for a bolt of silk in a color I didn't have a name for, a rose so deep it was nearly the color of dried blood, of old wine, of something that had been beautiful for a long time. It had become, first, a blouse concept. Then it had grown, through the autumn, through the winter, through all the hours in the spare room, into something architectural and whole, a lenga, a full garment that needed space around it to be understood. The silk that had started as an impulse in a crowded lane now grown into the keystone of a body of work. Kaveri held it up. "This," she said. "Tell me about this." Saloni told her. I listened from the kitchen. Her voice in the professional register, clear and exact, describing the process with the unhesitating confidence of someone explaining a thing she fully believes in. The construction, the choices, where the fabric had wanted to go, and where she'd insisted it go instead, and where, in the end, they'd compromised, she and the silk, the way you compromise with a strong material. Kaveri set the piece down. She looked at Saloni for a moment. "You made this from one length of fabric from Lajpat Nagar," she said. "Yes," Saloni said. "You're telling me you started with the fabric, not a sketch, not a concept, the fabric." "I always start with the fabric," Saloni said. "The design follows. The fabric knows what it wants to be. My job is mostly to not get in its way." Kaveri looked at her with an expression I had learned this year to recognize, the expression of a person discovering that a thing is better than they expected and recalibrating in real time around the discovery. It is a rare expression. Most people have decided what a thing is before they look at it and spend the looking confirming the decision. Kaveri had clearly come prepared to be disappointed. As a defense, the way people who have been let down by talent before come prepared, and she was, visibly, not being disappointed, and was visibly unsettled by it. "The collection is called what?" she said. "I haven't named it," Saloni said. "I was waiting to see what it became." Kaveri picked the rose-dark piece up again, held it to the window, to the hard March light, turning it so the light moved through the silk and showed its depth. "Call it distance," she said. "That's what it is. Look at it. It looks like something closing, that color, That's a color at the end of something. Dusk, the last of the wine. But it isn't closing. Look how it opens when it moves. It's a thing that looks like it's closing and is actually opening. Call it that. Saloni went very still. In the kitchen, I set the teacup down very carefully so that it would make no sound, because I did not want to be a sound in the room in that moment. The spare room was quiet. I could see them both through the doorway, the older woman holding the silk to the light, my wife standing very still in the center of the productive disorder of months. Yes, Saloni said finally, quietly. That's right. That's what it is. That evening, after Kaveri had gone and the flat had contracted back to its usual 2-person size, I found Saloni on the kitchen floor. Not the chair. The actual floor, her back against the cabinet, knees drawn up, eyes half closed, in the specific posture of a person who has spent everything and is letting the empty tank simply be empty for a while. The tea things from Kaveri's visit were still out. The light was going. I sat down on the floor beside her, my back against the same cabinet, our shoulders nearly touching. Well, I said. She wants all 12 pieces, Saloni said, not opening her eyes. By May. Is that possible? Probably not. A pause. I'll do it anyway. I lean my head back against the cabinet. The cool of it, the kitchen going blue with evening around us. Distance, I said. She turned her head and looked at me. In the failing light, her face was completely open, scrubbed of all its confidence, just tired and lit from somewhere inside. She's right, isn't she? I said, about the name. That's what this year has been. The whole thing. Something that looked like it was closing and was actually opening. She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that I thought she might not answer, that I'd said the too large thing, and she'd let it pass the way she let large things pass when she wasn't ready for them. Yes, she said. For both of us, I said. Yes, she said again. Softer. And then softer still, almost to herself. I didn't have the word for it either. A whole year, and I didn't have the word, and a woman walks in off the street and holds it up to the light, and there it is. Distance. The thing that opens. She let out a breath. How does she do that? How do people just see things? You see things, I said. You see them in fabric. She sees them in people. Same gift, different cloth. She turned her head and looked at me again, and something moved across her face, surprise, maybe at being understood at the exact angle she needed understanding. I reached over and took her hand off her knee and held it, there on the kitchen floor, in the blue light, with the tea going cold and the 12 impossible pieces waiting and the collection, finally, named. She let me hold it. She closed her eyes again and rested her head back against the cabinet and let the empty tank be empty, her hand in mine, and we sat on the kitchen floor in the dark for a long time, neither of us moving to turn on the light, and I thought, distance, the year that opened, and me on the floor of it, holding her hand, having finally learned enough of the language to understand the name of the thing we'd made. Later I wrote it down. She named the collection tonight, except she didn't. Kaveri did. Off the fabric, in one look. Distance. A thing that looks like it's closing and is actually opening. I have been living inside that sentence for a year, without being able to say it. Some people see in cloth. Some in people. S. On the kitchen floor, emptied out. More beautiful than I have words for. 12 pieces by May. She'll do it. She does the impossible ones. It's why the fabric trusts her. To be continued in episode 16, Kaveri's story.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 15 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.